DW Africa Link.
In international diplomacy, relationships between nations can shift dramatically, shaped by history, politics, and power struggles. Few cases illustrate this better than Rwanda's decision to sever diplomatic ties with Belgium, a move rooted in deep historical wounds, political tensions, and shifting alliances. What led to this dramatic fallout? Was it a long brewing consequence of colonial legacies or a response to more recent political maneuvers? Let's dive into the complex web of events that pushed Rwanda to cut ties with its former colonial ruler. Stay tuned for a deep dive into this intellectually stimulating geopolitical puzzle. My name is Josey Mahachi. Welcome to Africa Link, the podcast that connects you to the stories that matter from Africa, providing you with an in-depth analysis to keep you informed and knowledgeable.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
For several weeks now, neighbors Rwanda and DRC have been trending, but unfortunately not for a good narrative. Recently, Rwanda cut diplomatic ties with Belgium, saying it has been in courts consistently undermined by the European nation during the ongoing conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Brussels has been leading calls for European countries to sanction Rwanda over its support for the M23, a rebel group at the center of DR Congo's crisis. Before Kigali cut ties with Brussels, Rwandan President Paul Kagame vowed that his country would, in quotes, stand up to Belgium. To discuss this further, I'm joined by Dr. Fredrick Golooba Mutebi, an academic researcher on the Great Lakes region, and DW's correspondent Nasra Bishumba in Kigali. I'll have to start with you, Fredrick, as an academic and researcher in the Great Lakes region. What was your initial reaction when you had or maybe saw the news alerts that Rwanda had cut ties with Belgium? I mean, were you surprised?
No, I wasn't surprised. Rwanda and Belgium have had fairly difficult relations in recent years. And when Rwanda chose to suspend the bilateral aid program, it signaled that Rwanda had pretty much reached the end of the tether as far as provocations from Belgium are concerned, or at least as they see them. Because anyone who has listened to President Kagame in recent times, or even to the foreign minister of Rwanda talking about Belgium, it's very clear that they're quite unhappy or annoyed with the way Belgium has been conducting itself with regard to Rwanda. Mm-hmm. And as President Kagame pointed out, the difficult history of Belgian or Belgo-Rwanda relations didn't start with the M23 conflict. It goes back a little bit. And so in Rwanda, Belgium is seen as a bit overbearing, as seeking to manipulate Rwanda, as seeking to assert itself and direct Rwanda and dictate what Rwanda does. And Rwanda doesn't like that at all. So I wasn't surprised. And of course, the other reason I wasn't surprised is because it's not the first time they do it. They severed relations with France some time ago. And so this is the second time they do it. I think it's a demonstration that Rwanda can be as tough as it has shown before with France and as it has shown this time with Belgium.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned something there, Fredrick, that the M23 tension is not actually the root cause. It goes back. So what pivotal historical factors do you think have significantly contributed to the current standoff between the two countries? Let's try and delve into the past to understand the present.
I think one can go as deep into history as far as when Belgium took over Rwanda as a trustee territory and the history of all the upheavals in Rwanda from 1959, in which Belgium played a very direct role. Now, at least many of the people who are key decision makers in Rwanda have been direct victims of Belgium's conduct in Rwanda as a colonial power, but also as a bilateral partner in Rwanda since Rwanda became independent. So there is a great deal of history, and if you read how Rwanda explained Belgium's, what they call Belgium's neo-colonial delusions, you can see there is a historical timeline. Belgium is accused of having killed a Rwandan king, of having exiled another one, of having played a direct role in all the previous massacres predating the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. But in more recent years, there have also been actions that Rwanda objected to. For instance, when Mr. Karega, former Rwandan ambassador to South Africa and DRC, was nominated as ambassador designate to Belgium a few years ago, Belgium rejected him on the grounds that he had been responsible for harassing Rwandan exiles in South Africa. Now, he had left South Africa, been ambassador in DRC, and so Rwanda found it objectionable that Belgium should be choosing to reject its nominee allegedly because he had played some kind of anti-human rights role in South Africa. So Rwanda chose to not nominate another person, and when the Belgian ambassador in Rwanda left and Belgium nominated an ambassador, Rwanda did not respond. They didn't approve that ambassador either. So that's a demonstration of tensions that predate the current crisis in the DRC. And one can give very many details.
Mm-hmm. Do you see that relationship ever coming back to a strong one? And when we say strong one this time around, we mean permanent relations?
For as long as I have known Rwanda, the government of Rwanda is quite pragmatic. And I think that once this crisis has blown over, chances of relations being reestablished are there. The question is what kind of relationship it will be. Will it be a cozy, very close relationship? That's pretty difficult for me to envisage, because I think that Belgium's history in Rwanda has left very deep wounds. There are many Rwandans who are not very fond of Belgium as a country, both those who are in decision-making positions and even ordinary Rwandans. So I think that it's a country that they could have relations with in a pragmatic way, probably restore the bilateral aid program and do other things together. But whether that then becomes a bosom friendship where they're all very fond of each other, I'm not sure. That remains to be seen.
Right. Now, just to come to you, Nasra, is our eyes and ears on the ground, looking at this discussion. Before Kigali cut ties with Brussels, Rwandan President Paul Kagame vowed that his country would, in quotes, stand up to Belgium. What can you tell us about what he meant by standing up to Belgium?
Just like Mr. Golooba has said, this is not the first time that the president of Rwanda has spoken out strongly against Western pressure. He has been vocal about it for quite some time, because he says he sees a pattern of European countries using, AIDS, human rights, diplomacy as narratives to basically leverage over African countries. But to answer your question, when President Kagame said he would stand up to Belgium, he was making a clear statement, of course, about the resistance to what he calls foreign interference. He has long maintained that Rwanda will not allow former colonial powers or any other foreign nation to dictate the policies in his country, whether it is in security, whether it's in governance. So what I can say is that in this context, standing up meant asserting Rwanda's right to make independent decisions, even if that means cutting off ties with countries.
So then what happens to Belgian institutions like schools inside Rwanda, Nasra, now that the embassy has been closed?
The government of Rwanda has been very clear. The issue it has is government-to-government relations. Schools like École Belge that have been operating in Rwanda since the 1960s continue to operate. Everywhere else, for Belgians who are not diplomats, it's business as usual.
Right. Now, coming back to you, Fredrick, Brussels has been leading calls for European nations to sanction Rwanda over its support for the M23. I know you touched a bit on this, but how would you then describe Belgium's attitude towards Rwanda's leadership?
I think with regard to the current conflict in the DRC, what Rwanda would have expected, and I think what even fair-minded observers would have expected to have been a constructive role from Belgium, would have been one of mediating between or among the warring parties. But Belgium coming out very strongly against Rwanda and seeking to have it sanctioned, seeking to have aid cut, and pressurizing other Western countries to punish Rwanda, quote unquote, really quite clearly pointed out that Belgium had taken sides in this conflict. Now, Belgium, as I heard their foreign minister state a few days ago, has been making this argument that somehow for them, they are concerned more about Rwanda's alleged violation of the DRC's sovereignty or territorial integrity. Now, that's very fine. But if Belgium goes ahead and fronts this so-called violation of the DRC's territorial integrity, it's as if to state quite clearly that they don't care about Rwanda's concerns in the DRC, or that Rwanda's concerns are somehow irrelevant. Now, what are Rwanda's concerns in the DRC? There is this group consisting of people who planned and executed genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda in 1994, the FDLR, which is in Congo, which has been given space to operate. They levy taxes on local populations. They engage in trading. They have been armed by the DRC, various DRC governments over the last 30 years. Some of them are embedded in the DRC army, and they threaten Rwanda's security. Now, Rwanda has been making this argument over the last 30 years. Occasionally, they have been allowed into the DRC to pursue this group, but they argue that they are never given enough time to do that, and because these people are partly embedded in the DRC army, they are warned in advance. So there has never really been a long-term concerted effort to help Rwanda neutralize this group. Mm-hmm. So if we assume that Rwanda has troops in the DRC or that Rwanda is supporting M23, why is the question, why are they doing it, not asked? Why is the most important thing to argue that Rwanda is violating the DRC's territorial integrity, and that's what really matters above everything else? Now, by Belgium doing that, it has really quite laid out clearly its lack of concern with Rwanda's preoccupations in the DRC. And for Rwanda, that's really a red line as far as I know, having worked in Rwanda and lived there for as long as I have done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, recently Rwanda has agreed to an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in the Democratic Republic of Congo, despite previously denying support to M23 rebels. We saw Qatar being a mediator there. What have you got to say about that, Fredrick?
As far as I know, Rwanda supports the proposal for an immediate ceasefire. One can interpret this as a ceasefire between Rwanda and the DRC. One can also interpret it as a ceasefire between the DRC government and M23. Now, does Rwanda support M23? Does M23 enjoy the sympathies of the Rwanda government? Yes. And President Kagame has been very clear about this. He has stated it. He has referred to all the Congolese Rwandophones, mainly of Tutsi identity, who are exiled in Rwanda, who have been living in camps for the last 30 years, allegedly, because they were chased out of the DRC to return home to Rwanda. And this is only because they speak in Rwanda and share the same culture as Rwandans or nationals of Rwanda. Now, many of the people in M23 are either relatives or children of these people who are holed up in the camps. And M23 are fighting to return home to their ancestral lands in the eastern DRC. And Rwanda is very sympathetic to this because they are justified to want to return home. Why should they not? And the argument that somehow, because they are Kinyarwanda speaking, they are of Kinyarwanda culture, therefore they are Rwandans rather than citizens of the DRC, is really quite clearly nonsensical. So the ceasefire, one can read it as a ceasefire between Rwanda and the DRC, but one can also read it as a ceasefire between the DRC and M23. And if Rwanda supports that, of course, Rwanda has some leverage over M23. It can be a broker between the two sides to prevail on M23 to engage in talks with the government of the DRC.
Just to shift a bit from our topic, which is, of course, the Rwanda and Belgium relations, Fredrick, another thing that I found fascinating was only Qatar finally putting these two leaders in one room. Africa Union seemed to have failed, SADC seemed to have failed, ECOWAS seemed to have failed. Does it mean that Africa does not believe in itself?
African actors have not been very proactive in terms of trying to bring these two sides together. Well, we have the joint ESC SADC meetings where they produce communiques and make decisions about what to do. But for some reason, the DRC government doesn't seem to honor the decisions made there. Sometimes President Tshisekedi doesn't attend. We have the process where things have been agreed in advance, and then before meetings are held, the Congo government will come out with declarations that seem to minimize what is going to be discussed in Rwanda, and therefore Rwanda saying, oh, well, if that's the case, then we don't need to turn up. But looking at Qatar is looked at by both sides, in my estimation, as an honest broker. First of all, Qatar has excellent relations with Rwanda. I think there is a relationship of real deep trust between President Kagame and the Emir of Qatar. Yeah, and I think that for President Tshisekedi, we should not underestimate the effect of recent events in Eastern DRC having had on him. First of all, he had declared before that he wanted to take war to Rwanda. He had declared that Goma would never fall. He had declared that he would never speak to M23. And then we had Goma falling, we had Bukavu falling, we had M23 capturing more territories. We had the Congolese army collapse entirely in front of the M23. We've had populations welcoming M23. So there has been a demonstration not only that M23 has the capacity to fight the war and possibly win it and defeat the DRC government, and therefore possibly lead to the collapse of the Tshisekedi regime. There has also been quite openly a demonstration by populations in areas where M23 has arrived that they're also tired of the Tshisekedi government, and they are very happy to welcome M23, partly because the Congolese army misbehaves and mistreats civilians. So I think that the demonstrative effect of the collapse of the army, the fall of Goma, the fall of Bukavu, the fall of other territories would have conveyed the message to President Tshisekedi that if he chooses to continue with the war, it's likely he's going to lose it.
Right. Now, Nasra, just to come back to our main discussion, Brussels, in retaliation and as expected, also expelled Rwandan diplomats, declaring them persona non grata. Have they arrived home since they were not given a particular deadline to leave, like was the case for Belgian diplomats stationed in Rwanda?
Yes, the Rwandan diplomats that were based in Belgium are back in Rwanda, as confirmed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And he was saying that although Belgium did not give the 48-hour deadline, but in diplomatic circles, it is expected that the deadline put by the government that expelled diplomats first is the same deadline that the country on the receiving end.
Right. And how have Rwandans been reacting to the diplomatic standoff between Rwanda and Belgium?
Well, the reactions inside Rwanda have been mixed. Of course, largely you'll have so many people supporting the government's decision. Many Rwandans have not forgotten Belgium's involvement in the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. And of course, you see all this support mostly on social media, where you will see many Rwandans airing their frustrations on what they believe is Belgium looking down on Rwanda for decades now, despite the country's remarkable progress. You also see lots of nationalistic sentiments. Of course, some people are saying, say no to colonialism. Others are saying Rwanda doesn't need interference. But also, on a lighter note, if you go to YouTube, some creators have used AI to compose catchy songs that have... of course, they have used international popular artists such as Lady Gaga to attract more views, but they have used AI, and I will give you an example. Currently, there's a song entitled Stop Punishing Rwanda, Rwanda is Innocent, that has surprisingly garnered over 150,000 views and over 1,300 comments, many of which support the message. But also, on the other hand, you have questions about the implications of this. People wonder if it will affect travel. Others wonder if it will affect business. Students studying in Belgium have been wondering. Yeah, there are questions, but so far what we have at least heard from the assurances from the government of Rwanda is that this is a government-to-government issue and the citizens are okay to go on with their business.
Now let's talk about something that Nasra touched on earlier, Fredrick. We're talking about media, whether it's social media or traditional media or international media, its impact, of course, with its far-reaching influence. How do you think this has shaped public opinion regarding the conflict in East DRC?
Well, let me start with international media.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with the international media is, first of all, they're very good at shaping attitudes and opinion because they have great reach. I mean, the BBC is listened to by many people, Radio France International, the same thing, VOA, the same thing. These media's narratives tend to be shaped by the attitudes of their own governments towards Rwanda or the attitudes of their own governments towards an issue in which Rwanda might be involved. Now, recently, about 2-3 days ago, I was listening to an interview on the BBC with the Foreign Minister of Belgium, and it was quite striking that the BBC journalist was talking about Rwanda having been allowed to run amok in the DRC and Rwanda not being punished, and why have the big powers not cut off aid and punished Rwanda. You could see that the journalist was totally ignoring the reasons why Rwanda is concerned with what's going on in Eastern DRC and simply driving this narrative that somehow Rwanda needs to be punished and Rwanda, Western powers should not indulge Rwanda. No mention whatsoever of the problems that Rwanda faces because of instability in the DRC. No mention whatsoever of the role the DRC government itself has played in making Rwanda feel insecure by arming insurgents in the eastern DRC, by embedding them in its own army. So the DRC is left to get away with too much, where the narrative being shaped is one of Rwanda being the aggressor, Rwanda violating the territorial integrity of the DRC, Rwanda needing to be punished, but really making very little mention or none at all of the DRC's own role in all this. And that has been my experience with media over the last 30 years. It's as if they live on the moon or something, or as if they are not aware of anything else happening around Rwanda except Rwanda being an aggressor. They don't even mention why M23 was established in the first place. They don't talk about refugees in Rwanda who want to go home. They are just harping on about how Rwanda's aid must be withdrawn, how Rwanda has been allowed to get away with too much. So that's international media. Now, when it comes to African media, and this is quite unfortunate, a lot of African media actually are very good at parroting what Western media produce. They depend on Western media agencies to produce reports for them, which they just reproduce entirely in their own newspapers or on the airwaves without any editing, without any nuance at all. So it's quite rare to find African media that would be reporting about Rwanda or writing on Rwanda that are nuanced enough to try and create a balanced picture. If we can argue that Rwanda is aggressing the DRC, we should also ask the question, why is it doing it? Is it that Rwandans just enjoy fighting? Is that President Kagame wakes up one day and says to his army, or go into Congo and start fighting, or go into Congo and bring some minerals? Is there something deeper underlying what we see in the DRC? This really, for the most part, goes unreported.
Right. Thank you so much, Fredrick Golooba and Nasra Bishumba, for joining us here on DW Africa Link Podcast. At the Africa Link Podcast, we always look across the continent to see how the stories and issues we are dealing with play out or at times even overlap. While Rwanda has cut ties with Belgium, its neighbor, the DRC is strengthening ties with Belgium and building new ones with Western powers like the United States, promising minerals in exchange for security. In fact, Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi met a U.S. lawmaker, Ronnie Jackson, to discuss fighting in the east of the country and opportunities for U.S. investment. The meeting took place 1 week after Washington said it was open to exploring critical minerals partnerships with Congo. However, observers say the DRC will struggle to entice U.S. mining companies to invest in Congo due to poor infrastructure, insecurity, corruption, and the dominance of Chinese firms. That's it for this edition of Africa Link. Remember, you are not just a listener, but a crucial part of our community. Your engagement can shape the direction of our discussions, and we value your insights. We encourage you to share your thoughts with us, and remember to follow so you can catch all of the Africa Link podcast episodes. This podcast was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabi. My name is Josey Mahachi. Thanks for listening. Until the next one, it's bye for now.
DW News.
Here are today's top news stories and why they matter. The Rwanda-backed M23 armed group has taken control of the mining hub of Walikale in the Democratic Republic of Congo despite attempts to broker a ceasefire this week. The town of 15,000 people fell after fighting on Wednesday between the rebels and the army and allied militias. How significant is this? Walikale is the furthest to the west the rebels have reached in their advancement that had already overrun eastern Congo's two largest cities since January. The town is in an area rich in minerals, including tin, and lies along a road that links 4 eastern Congo provinces. The capture of Walikale now puts the rebels within 400 kilometers of Kisangani, which is the country's 4th biggest city with a bustling port at the Congo River. The rebels had earlier vowed to march some 1,500 kilometers to Kinshasa. The leader of the M23 alliance has dismissed the appeal for a ceasefire.
They've put prices on our arrest. We have nothing more to lose. We will fight until our cause is heard. Meanwhile, what happened in Doha, as long as we don't know the details and as long as it doesn't solve our problems, we will say it does not concern